Do you want to know the one secret that makes sales easier the more you do it? In this episode, we're going to show you exactly what it is and how to implement it. Hello, Sales Nation, and welcome to today's episode of the Salesman Podcast. On today's show, we have Stephen M.R. Covey, author of The Speed of Trust, which you can find on Amazon and over at speedoftrust.com. And trust is the hack that makes all of selling, business, just relationships in general, easier. We're diving into what trust is, how you can instill it into your life, and how you can share with others that you are trustworthy, how you can be proactive about it all. And so, with all that said, let's jump into today's conversation. Stephen, welcome to the Salesman Podcast.
Hey, thank you, Will. Delighted to be with you.
I'm delighted to have you on. I'm enjoying this conversation already. I'm glad to have you on to talk about a topic which is both applicable in sales, business, and then as a man, and I guess as a woman, if you want to frame it that way, I think it's something that is defining as you as a person. And I feel when we're going to talk about trust, when I feel like when people trust me, I feel like that's the strongest I am as a man, as a person. And I'm keen to dive into how we can distill this down from the obvious to perhaps the subtleties and the not so obvious. But with all that said, let's start from the very beginning here. We all know it, we all feel it, but what is trust?
It's a good question because people will come up with all kinds of different answers to that. And here's a very simple way of thinking about it. Trust is confidence. Confidence. In fact, in many languages, trust and confidence are the exact same word. Like in Spanish, French, same word. In English, we have two words for it: trust, confidence. So another way to think about it, Will, is let's look at the opposite of trust. So the opposite of trust is suspicion. That's distrust, suspicion. I don't trust someone if I'm suspicious, say, about their agenda. What's their agenda here? Or what if I'm suspicious about their integrity or maybe their lack thereof? Or what if I'm suspicious about their ability to perform, to deliver, to come through, to do what they say they're going to do? So it's really that simple. It's confidence versus suspicion. Now, what I like to highlight, Will, is that it's important to understand where that confidence is coming from. And I suggest it comes from two sources. It comes from having both character and competence. Character and competence, both are vital. If you have one but lack the other, you will not sustain the trust.
I'm going to jump in here and I'm going to skip 15 questions ahead and then I'll bring it back to where I wanted to start the show. But you brought up something that's fascinating to me here. Do we have two words, other than there'll be linguistic reasons why, but is this a separation between trust that how to describe it? I can trust you, Stephen, that your book has sold crazy numbers. I can trust that you're going to come on the show and do a great job, and I'm putting that on you. Is confidence the opposite of that? Of I can be confident and not particularly care what you think, and that adds trust to the conversation as well. Are they two separate entities? Of one is pushing trust, and then the other one is asserting trust and having control of it?
I think that there is some usefulness in that distinction. And there is some area of distinction where I think in English there's an advantage, and the confidence can refer to a self-confidence and a surety in self versus an extension of trust. But what I'd like to really highlight here is that at the end of the day, to have trust in a relationship, in a buyer-seller relationship, so if I'm a salesperson, I need to both be trustworthy, which I call credibility, that I have high credibility. And that includes a self-trust, a self-confidence that I'm credible, that it's smart to trust me. So I need to be trustworthy, but I also need to be willing to extend the trust, to give trust. You got to give it to get it. And it's interesting because I've seen two trustworthy people working together, both trustworthy, but no trust in the relationship because neither party is willing to extend it to the other. So to have trust, you need to be both trustworthy, but also you need to be willing to give the trust, to extend the trust. And that's a key part of it. And so really there's a lot of different ways we can think about trust. And sometimes we can get, wrapped around it and confused by it. But trust is confidence. It flows from having both character and competence. And a great way to think about it is to have trust in a relationship, in a selling situation. I need to be both trustworthy, that is credible, but I also need to be willing to give and extend trust, to trust my customer, to trust my prospect. And I'll tell you why that's so vital, Will, is because there's a reciprocity of trust. And when you give it, people receive it and they return it. When you withhold it, they withhold it. I've worked with organizations all around the world. I find the number one reason why salespeople don't trust their sales leaders in many organizations is because, first and foremost, the leaders don't trust their salespeople. And then the salespeople reciprocate that distrust right back at the management. And the same thing can happen with suppliers, distributors, partners, even with customers. If you don't trust them, they tend to not trust you. But it works the other way too. When you do extend the trust, when you give it, people receive it, they return it. There is a reciprocity of trust, and it creates more. And so start with trust, focus on your trustworthiness, your credibility, but then also be willing to give and extend trust to others. And you'll watch, it will come back to you. It will become a virtuous upward cycle. You'll generate a reciprocity of trust. So that's kind of a simple way of thinking about trust, because we can get lost in a lot of different directions on this, but it's confidence. It comes from having character and competence, and to have it, to sustain it, to keep it, we need to be both trustworthy, but also we need to be willing to give it, to extend it to others.
I really want to dive into competence in a second. I think this is something that the audience and myself can get a lot out of there's a stereotype of the salesperson who says they're going to do all these incredible things, but they only happen once you close the deal. And I want to dive into what doing first before that signature is on the deal, what that does to trust, how that can make sales easier, how that can lubricate the sales process, for a better way of describing it. But you brought up something here which is interesting, with giving trust first. How let's use the salesperson and the sales manager dynamic here, perhaps. What is a practical way that a salesperson listening to the show now, because this is my experience of not having a great relationship with a sales manager, I didn't trust them to not drop me in the shit if I screwed up, and they didn't trust me to smash my target for numerous reasons, going back and forth. How could I have improved that relationship, improved the communication by giving trust first?
Good question. And again, there's no simple, easy answer to it, because there's certain different circumstances, situations, and you want to make sure you're always smart about giving trust versus a blind trust where you just indiscriminately trust anyone and everyone. But what I've learned is that if you first look in the mirror, start with yourself, trusting yourself, because it starts with self-trust and then it emanates out from there. And then you give to your sales manager, a salesman, a salesperson that can be trusted. And in other words, it's smart to trust you, that they should trust you because of who you are, your character, your competence, your credibility. And then when you give it to another first, or even to your sales manager, which is saying, look, I start with trust. I trust you that you have my best interest in mind and that you're seeking my advancement and my success as I focus on helping my clients succeed, helping my customers succeed. It's just a better starting point until proven otherwise. Now, look, if it's abused, if it's taken advantage of, if the sales manager does not reciprocate back and instead just abuses it, then at some point it may not be smart to continue that way. But I find too often, people start kind of with the premise of distrust, and it tends to become a self-fulfilling prophecy, and people respond back with distrust, and they find themselves mired in a distrustful, suspicious relationship where neither party trusts each other, and they both feel justified in the process. It's often very helpful to just kind of break that cycle and say, look, I choose to take a risk. I start with trust. But first I'm going to give you a salesperson, a sales rep that you can trust because I'm credible. But I start by trusting you until proven otherwise. That's a better starting point, and I hope you do the same with me. You can actually make a behavior-specific request of your boss. I trust you. I ask you to trust me. You know what? Most people will respond to that. A few may not. And if they don't, then okay, then it's maybe not smart to extend too much trust. But I'll tell you what, start with this as a better starting point. You'll be amazed at what it does. And there's all kinds of research on this and data of game theory, negotiation theory. There's a reciprocity to this. And if you lead with it, it tends to come back to you. And if you lead with distrust, that distrust also tends to come back with you. So be smart about it, but just, find to lead out in ways in extending trust to those around you, including your customers, especially your customers, and you'll find it'll come back to you.
Are human beings wired one way or the other to, because I could see it being a survival skill or instinct both ways, but are they wired to trust people that they don't know, or are they wired to immediately distrust and look for opportunities to trust people that they, if we're dealing with a potential customer that we never spoke to before, are they looking to, let me phrase that differently. Do they immediately trust us and then look for opportunities to turn that on its head? Or do they immediately distrust us and are looking for opportunities to build the trust?
Yes, there's so many factors tied to that, Will. In fact, it's very much, how one's raised. It's cultural, it's historical, it's political, in different contexts. But let me just start, if I could, initially. I think most of us are born with a desire to trust and be trusted. We as children, we tend to trust our parents. And then at some point, though, we learn that you can get burned, you can get disappointed, let down. And then we kind of, through that experience, we say, no, it's too risky to trust other people. And we start to move towards distrust to protect ourselves, because none of us want to get burned. But I think we start with the propensity to trust, but then over time, we tend to get it, beaten out of us, and we move the other direction. However, let me just acknowledge that it'll be different for different people, and there's different societies and cultures. There's some high trust societies and others that are lower trust. And if I'm coming from those different societies and cultures, I might be influenced by that environment. For example, let's take Denmark. Denmark is a high trust society, and sociologists measure it. They ask a question all around the world. They ask, do you generally believe that other people can be trusted? Or can you never be too careful in dealing with people? So can you trust people generally, a stranger and the like? Well, in Denmark, 89% of the people start with the premise that other people can be trusted. Now, let me give you a contrast. In Chile, it's 13%. So, if I'm coming in out of Denmark, most people start with the premise, I trust you until you give me a reason I shouldn't. In Chile, just the opposite. I don't trust you at all until you give me a reason why I should. So, and it's everything in between, all around the world, different countries, different situations. So it's not a one size fits all. But my point is that be aware of your starting point. Do you start with the propensity to trust yourself, or do you start with the propensity to distrust? But you can help affect that. You can help influence that by your starting point. And if you lead out with trust, you can help to generate the reciprocity. And some people might be taken aback by it. They might be surprised by it. They might feel like they can take advantage of you. But in most situations, instead, they will want to reciprocate. And then you'll see that reciprocity start to work with you and for you, and together you can go to a higher level. So it's a great question you ask, and there's no simple answer to it.
Good.
It'd
be too easy if it was simple, wouldn't it?
It'd be too easy. Yeah, that's right. But we can influence this no matter where we're starting. Okay,
so we'll get onto the influence. This is clearly the crux of the conversation in a second. I'm going to build up to that with one more question, and that is, and tell me if I'm right or wrong with this. I'll make a statement. You can pull it apart and make me look silly. I feel like, and this is almost an anecdote, well, it is an anecdote, I guess. I feel like in personal relationships, like with my girlfriend, for example, trust is on this sliding scale. And of course, we're always looking to trust each other more, not necessarily rely on each other more, but have that trust there that we've got each other's back. And it's almost infinite, the scale. Versus in business, I tend to find when I'm selling, when I'm doing deals, when I'm growing the show, when I'm inviting guests like yourself to come on the show, there's almost like a click moment where you've built enough trust for the deal to happen. Is that how it works in business versus in relationships outside of business, or am I completely off here? In business, is there an optimal point that we need to get to make the deal happen? And is there a Pareto's law 80-20 principle of it takes way more hard work to get beyond that. Perhaps it's worth it over the long term. But is that how what we should be aiming for? This initial click, the deal can happen level of trust, or is that almost a negative way of looking at it?
No, I actually think there's some merit to that. If you think about it as a trust account, a trust bank, just like a financial bank account, there's a balance of trust in the account. And if just like a financial bank account, if I take too many withdrawals or too big a withdrawal, I could be overdrawn, right? And there's insufficient funds. Same with the trust bank, the trust account. If I take too many withdrawals, too big a withdrawal, I could be overdrawn. There's insufficient trust in the account. And so in every relationship, there's kind of a level of trust, a balance of trust, a trust account. And we're trying to build that up. And how do we do it? We do it through our behavior and through our credibility. And we behave our way into greater trust. That's like making a deposit. And you're trying to get it higher and higher all the time. And you're right. At some point, if you do a deal together, you make a sell, you not only want to make the sell, more importantly, you also want to build a relationship of trust, because when you do that, the quality of that sell has just gone up. Your ability to make another sell has just gone up. Your ability to get a referral from that customer has just gone up because they trust you. And then when you create value for them and they see that there's value in the sell, it was a mutually beneficial deal, it was win-win, then they trust you even more. And then it comes back and it becomes a virtuous upward spiral, and you keep going up and up and up. And so I think it's fine to look at it as there's a trust account in a relationship, and you're obviously wanting to constantly be increasing it, growing it, because that will help you navigate difficult times, and you're not trying to drop on the reservoir of trust by violating it, but you're always just trying to build that trust so that when there is something that maybe goes wrong, people give you the benefit of the doubt, and they the trust bank is there to help in the transition period while they try to understand more, learn more, and work together with you. So I think it's a fair way of looking at it. The trust account, the level of trust in any given relationship. And you're right, there is kind of a Pareto 80-20, but that's more around behaviors. There's certain behaviors that will build trust faster, and other behaviors that will destroy trust faster. And getting good at those behaviors like, talking straight, which is telling the truth, and creating transparency, which is telling the truth in a way that people can verify for themselves, and clarifying expectations, and then practicing accountability, being accountable, listening first. Listening first is a powerful behavior that builds trust. When people feel understood, they tend to then be more open to your influence. They trust you more. Keeping commitments is maybe the biggest of them all. You make and keep commitments constantly. It's a fast way to build trust. It's also a fast way to lose trust, is to make them and to break them. And then I come back to that when I started with, which is extending trust. It's ironic that one of the best ways to create trust is simply to give it. Why? Because of the reciprocity of trust principle. It comes back to us. So you can get good at this. But I think my main point I would like to make on this is that there are real economics to trust. And you hinted at this earlier, Will. Maybe you were going here next with your question, that when the trust goes up in a relationship, with a prospect, with a customer, with a client, on a team, with a sales manager, and with a salesperson, in any situation, when the trust goes up, you will find that the speed goes up with it. Everything will happen faster, and the cost comes down. Everything will cost you less. Now that is a dividend, a high trust dividend. And you know what? The converse is equally true. When the trust goes down in a relationship with a prospect, with a customer, on a team, with a manager, when the trust goes down, you'll find that the speed will go down with it. Everything will take you longer to do, and the cost will go up. It will cost you a whole lot more. In fact, when there's significant distrust, it can literally double the cost of doing business. That is a tax, a low trust tax. And Will, it's that simple, that powerful, that predictable, and it's playing out everywhere. So I would just ask our listeners, think of, a relationship, a client, where you have built a high trust relationship. What's it like to work with them? How fast can you move when there's trust, mutual trust? And when it comes up for the renewal of the contract and you've built trust and you've created value, the speed at which you can move, the low cost. And just contrast that, if you would, to a relationship where for whatever reason there's low trust, or at least it's not where you want it to be. And now it comes time for the renewal, but they don't fully trust you. And maybe you don't fully trust them. Now, what's that renewal process like? What's that sales process like? How long does it take? It takes you longer, costs you more. It's that simple, that easy, that powerful, and that predictable. It's playing out everywhere. So we got to get trust to work as a huge asset, a huge advantage for any salesperson, any leader, any organization. It's a huge advantage. It is a multiplier. It's an accelerator. It's also an energizer of the relationship. It changes everything. You still have to do the other things, but if you start with trust, you get a multiplier on everything else you're trying to do. Your ability to collaborate, partner, team, create, innovate, all goes up with trust. The speed at which you can move, it costs you less. It's energizing, it's pleasant, it's fun, you enjoy it. So this is all part of the economics of trust. And it's very real, it's playing out everywhere. And we all I shouldn't say we all, but many of us look right past it. We kind of assume this, take it for granted, but we don't focus on it consciously, deliberately. This is so foundational, so fundamental that we often ignore it. But I would say let's become intentional about trust. In sales, let's compete on trust. And you watch, if you have that ability to create trust, to inspire trust, and to start with trust, and to create trust in the relationship, and as then follow on with creating value, then it will affect your ability to do everything else. You'll sell more. You'll have better relationships. You'll have it'll be more enduring. They'll buy more. They'll refer more business to you, and they'll stay with you longer. They'll give you the benefit of the doubt. All these things go up with trust. So I call it the great multiplier and the great accelerator, not only to sales, but to really leadership and to life.
Tell you what, Stephen, I'm motivated. I need you to ring me every morning with a pitch like that and get my lazy ass out of bed and hustling. I was nervous to say anything to interject because you're on a roll there. I appreciate that. And do you know what? I feel like whether it's correct or it's incorrect, but the stereotype, and obviously it's more transactional sales versus the complex sales that we cover on this show. But if more people listened to which was essentially a rant like that each morning, even if I just take that as a clip and that's something that they can just listen to over and over and over, I don't think the negative stereotype of salespeople would be the same as what it potentially is right now. If people realign their priorities and went out their way to put in the hard work now to build trust, to make sales easier in the 12-month, 24-month, 5-year period down the line, when you've got these relationships where deals come to you and referrals come to you, because people trust that you've both said you're going to do something, kind of to run a few things that you mentioned then, but you've kept your commitments, you've done what you said you were going to do, you've given first, all these kind of things. To bring it back to ground level for a second here, let me pitch you this. Sam, the salesman, he's totally on board, wants to increase the levels of trust, integrity. He wants to start from himself within, and then he wants to project this outwards. He looks himself in the mirror and he goes, "Oh, I wouldn't really trust myself as far as I can throw myself. I'm not feeling good about this. This has struck a nerve with him. He's now getting excited that there's change. That moment where you have that light bulb shine on in your head and he goes, right, now is the time that I understand. I'm aware that I'm perhaps not trustworthy through multiple reasons, through cultural reasons, through upbringing, through not trusting other people and so not being able to be trusted himself." Where's the starting point of this? When Sam is looking at the mirror, he's probably stood there in his boxers, not feeling great about himself. Where's the starting point of all of this?
I love it, because the starting point is the looking in the mirror. That is the starting point versus looking out the window and pointing the finger at everybody else, saying, they're the problem. The prospects are the problems. The customers are the problems. My boss is the problem. It's easy to look out the window at everybody else, but the starting point really is to look in the mirror and ask yourself this question, do I trust myself? And how credible am I? And so I would say, as you're asking yourself that question, you're looking at both in terms of your character and your competence. And on the character, I'm looking kind of in two dimensions there on the character side, my integrity. And do I do what I say I'm going to do? Do I do I do the right thing? What's my integrity? Am I honest? Am I truthfulness? But also I'm looking at my intent. What's my intent? Am I just trying to make the sale to make money? Or am I really trying to help my clients succeed? I'm trying to create value for those that I'm serving, those that I'm trying to sell to. I'm focusing on them. Look, I'm not against making money. I want to make money, but I'm thinking in terms of win-win, abundance, mutual benefit. My starting point is I start with saying, I'd like to help you win. And of course, I'd like to win too, but my win comes through your win. I help my client succeed. My intent is to help you succeed. And if that's the intent, that will really help. So I start there, focusing on my character, my integrity, my intent.
Is this something that, sorry to interrupt, I can feel you get on to the next point then, but is this something that we should measure, track, and or document? Is this something that we look in the mirror and say, do I trust myself? I give myself a 3 out of 5 because I apply myself sometimes, but I don't always follow through on what I said I'd do. Then you look at how credible you are. Is this something that we can put on a scale, or is it less tangible than that?
Well, yes to both. It is less tangible, and yes, you can measure it. You can. At one level, we all kind of have a sense of this, and you can really ask yourself, do I trust myself? And do I give to my prospects and my clients a salesperson that they can trust? Is it smart to trust me? And you can kind of gauge yourself on that. But if you want, you can measure it. And we do measure it. We got some basic tools in my book, The Speed of Trust. There's tools on our website, speedoftrust.com, you could look at. We actually have a 360 feedback instrument for a salesperson or a leader or anyone of how trusted am I, where they assess themselves around those 4 dimensions, the integrity and the intent that flows out of your character. And then on the competence, I call it the capabilities, the results that flows from your competence. You can measure it there. You can put it on a scale and measure it, or you can kind of just get an intuitive sense of it. So yes, to either. It could be both very deliberate, intentional, and measurable, or it could be kind of a directional thing, whatever works for you. But I think that, let me add one more piece of what I do. So if I assess myself and I say, gosh, maybe I don't feel so much self-trust in myself, and maybe I'm not quite as honest or as open, as transparent as I want to be, need to be. Where do I start there? My simple answer to that is, I've looked in the mirror, I've looked at myself, and if I find myself lacking somewhat, here's the best way I know to increase personal self-trust. And it's a parallel from the best way to increase trust with another person. The research shows the number one way to increase trust with another person, with a client, with a prospect, with a manager, the leader, is to make them a commitment and then to keep it. And then make another commitment and to keep it. And you repeat that process. Make, keep, repeat. Make, keep, repeat. You do what you say you're going to do. You say it, you do it. Make, keep, repeat. It becomes a virtuous upward cycle. You can build trust. You can build it exceptionally fast that way. Well, that's also the fastest way to build trust with yourself. Learn to make and keep commitments to yourself. And start with the little things. And it could be, I'm going to get up tomorrow at 5 and go exercise. And the alarm goes off at 5 and I get up and I keep that commitment, that little commitment to myself. And because it's very easy to kind of make all kinds of commitments to yourself that you don't keep, or you might not even have any intention to keep, but you can lose that self-trust. And so just in those little things, learn to make and keep commitments to yourself as a way of increasing your sense of clarity, your sense of integrity, your sense of power. The self-trust will come from that. So that's a kind of you ask the right question, which is look in the mirror first, assess yourself, learn to make and keep commitments to yourself is a great way to start. And then you move out. So that's the character side, the integrity, the intent. I use a metaphor of a tree. That's like the integrity is the roots of the tree. The intent is the trunk of the tree. Then the competence side is the upper half of the tree, the branches and the fruits. So I divide competence into 2 key pieces, your capabilities and your results. So capabilities is like the branches of the tree that produce the fruits, and the results are the fruits of the tree. So capabilities, right? The branches, That's my talents, my skills, my expertise, my knowledge. I'm always learning. I'm always improving. I'm listening to your podcast. Well, to get better, to understand how to close, how to create value, how to understand clients, how to listen first, how to identify needs, how to really focus on helping my clients succeed. I'm constantly getting better, improving. I'm relevant with my industry. I'm relevant with what's going on in the marketplace and how I can add more value. I'm learning. See, those are capabilities that keeps me relevant. And then those branches of the tree produce the fruits. And the fruits is my results, my performance, my current performance, my past performance. Do I deliver? Have I created value for my customer? Do they see the value? Because, on paper, I could have the first three. I could be honest. I could care about them. They might feel like I care about their interest. On paper, I have the right capabilities. I'm smart. I know my stuff. But what if my track record is that I haven't created value? It doesn't work. It doesn't create the value that I've told them it's going to create. That lack of results would undermine the trust. I got to have the fruits as well to have that trust. And so I'm constantly focusing on delivering. If I'm, for my sales manager, I'm trying to earn his or her trust. I'm trying, they love people that perform, that deliver. And that they have more confidence. They want to give more leads to them when they deliver, when they come through and they get the fruits, the results. And so that is also vital to building trust. So I call it the 4 cores of credibility: integrity and intent that flow from your character, capabilities and results that flow from your competence. And so if I look in the mirror and ask, how credible am I? Is it smart to trust me as a salesperson? And I look in those 4 areas: my integrity, doing the right thing; my intent, seeking mutual benefit; my capabilities, staying relevant; and my results, my performance, my track record, and coming through and creating value. And say, how can I get better in those 4 areas? That's a great starting point, at which then that's credibility. Then when I add to that behavior, which is how I do what I do, I talk straight, I tell the truth, I'm transparent, I clarify expectations, I deliver results, I get better constantly, I confront reality, I practice accountability, I listen first, I keep commitments, and I extend trust. I just identified high leverage behaviors to help you build trust as a salesperson. And you do those things with your client, built on a foundation of credibility, you'll accelerate the building of trust. It will be like huge deposits into the trust account, the trust bank, and the trust will go up. And then it becomes a virtuous upward cycle. So that's the idea. You behave your way into greater trust, just like you can behave your way out of trust. You can lose it through your behavior. You can also win it, earn it, create it through your behavior.
Love it. And of course, anyone who's excited, got a grin like mine from ear to ear, clearly the book dives into all of this in more detail and kind of the next step from this podcast. But final thing I want to wrap up on here, Stephen, is how much of this is we become better people, we have more integrity, we do it all, and then it's observed by others, and I'm sure some of this is gut feeling as well as a calculated, can we trust this individual? How much of it is just absorbed naturally? And then how much of this needs to be overtly communicated to a potential customer, of even just the wording of how you go about doing things, of I'm doing this because you're not going to say I care about you, but you could say I'm going to do X, Y, Z because your outcomes are 1, 2, 3, and I want them to align. How much of this do we need to communicate with them, and how much of it do we need to, again, I guess just suck it up and just do the right thing?
I think that's a great question, Will. Very insightful, because the reality is, if you kind of just naturally do these things, then you will be building relationships of trust. It will follow, it will happen, but it may not happen quite as fast. If you can be more deliberate about it, more intentional, explicit, you make the creation of trust an explicit objective in the relationship. You always have the 2 goals. You want to make the sale by creating value for the client, and getting a mutually beneficial win-win deal. You want to make the sale, but you also want to build a relationship of trust. That matters to you as much as the first is to build that relationship of trust, because the quality of that sale goes up dramatically when they trust you. It's possible I could have made the sale and not built the relationship of trust. And the quality of that sale has just gone down. And so I'm conscious about it. I'm intentional about it. And again, some people can just naturally do this, and it will follow. They'll build trust. They'll build relationships of trust, and people will refer. But you know what? It will follow much faster. And with more people, if you're intentional about it, if you're deliberate about it, if you declare your intent, even to your prospect, your customer of, I want to build a relationship of trust and be a trusted partner to you, because if we can trust each other, everything's better. And, I declare my intent. And then a second thing is I then tell them what I'm going to do. I call that signaling your behavior. It's like if you're on the freeway driving and you want to change lanes, what do you do? Or what should you do? You should turn the blinker on, right? The signal. And you're not doing that for yourself. You already know what you're going to do. You're doing it for others so that they might know what you're going to do. They're looking for it. That way they're looking for it. They're aware of it. They see the signal coming. They're aware of it now. And then, so that's the second thing, signal your behavior. That is, tell them what you're going to do, having first declared your intent to build a relationship of trust, because that's better for everyone. Now I tell them what I'm going to do. I signal my behavior. And then the most important step is that third step. I now do what I said I was going to do. I deliver on it. But you know what? I'll build trust faster having done the first two steps in advance, having declared my intent to build trust in the relationship, having told them what I'm going to do, because now they're aware of it. They're looking for it. Then when I deliver on it, I do what I say I'm going to do. They say, aha, just like Will said. He said he was going to do it. He did. Just like Stephen said, just like Susan said. He did what he said he was going to do. She did what she said she was going to do. I see it. I recognize it. I value it. I credit them faster than had I not done that. But be aware, you'll also lose trust faster if you do the first two steps and not the third. If you declare your intent, do you want to build trust? If you then tell them what you're going to do and then you don't do it, trust will go down faster. So, risk and return go together, but you can accelerate the building of trust by doing those things, being intentional, declaring your intent, signaling your behavior, and then delivering on it. You'll build it faster. You'll destroy it faster if you don't deliver on it. So you don't want to mess around with this. It's not a game. It's an extension of your character, your competence, who you are, who you're about, your credibility. This is now putting it into action, putting it into practice. And as you become really intentional about this, because part of how you sell, you're always trying to get a mutually beneficial deal and build a relationship of trust. You watch, you'll become part of your reputation, your brand. It will go in front of you. You'll build trust faster. You'll get referral business going left and right. You'll build not only relationships of trust, you'll build a reputation of trust, and it becomes that virtuous upward spiral. You'll get it working for you as a huge differentiator in the marketplace, for you as a salesperson, for your team, for your organization. So this is a huge asset. I love your question. Be deliberate about it. Be intentional about it. Now, look, if you're not and you still do the right things, it will happen, but it will happen less fast and with less people, and it may not be as deliberate. So you're not trying to brag. You're just trying to instead signal your behavior, and then you deliver on what you said, and people will look for it. They'll see it. They'll credit you. You'll build trust faster. You'll make more sales that way.
I love it. I feel like we've only scratched the surface here, Steve. I've got questions in my mind as we go through this conversation of how we can use this out of sales to build more deeper and loving relationships with our families. If this is different between building trust with a man and a woman, if you look at masculine and feminine energies and the communication between back and forth on that front. I've got loads more questions, so I'll have you back on in the future to dive into some of these in more detail perhaps. But I've got one final question to ask everyone that comes on the show, and that is, if you could go back in time and speak to your younger self, what would be the one piece of advice you'd give him to help him become better at selling?
My one piece of advice would be to see that the first job of sales is to create trust, and the second job is to create value. Because if you don't do the first, you'll have a hard time doing the second, because people tend to look upon value through the lens of whether they trust you or not. And when you start by building that trust, that relationship, that you're credible, and you do what you say you're going to do, even on little things, in the sales process is where that really starts. And even sometimes in advance of that, with your reputation, your brand, it gets out in front of you. Then you begin to then focus on the value creation as an extension of the building of the trust. It's part of the results. It's the fruits of the tree. You're creating value for your customer because of your intent. Your intent is to help clients succeed and not to make the sale. Is to help my clients succeed. And so, the currency of sales is trust. And in fact, in a very real way, sales is trust monetized. And so I would just see it through that lens. The very first job of sales is to create trust. And the second job is to create value. And as I do that together, that becomes a virtuous upward cycle, because the more trust I create, it opens up to how they view the value. And the more value I create for them, the more they trust me. I've delivered those fruits on the tree. They trust me even more. And that becomes this virtuous upward spiral. But it's a great starting point to view sales through the lens of trust, to compete on trust more than on product and pricing and promotion and channel and all the different things. Those are all important. Start with trust. And you still have to do all the other things, but you get trust working for you. It's an extraordinary multiplier. It's an accelerator. It's an energizer for the relationship. It's more fun, and it tends to perpetuate itself. So that would be my advice to myself, is to come back to some of the learnings of where I am now and say, start with trust. And in the first job of sales is to create trust.
Well, I've got another 500 conversations to have with you now, based around the idea and the concept of most sales trainers, quote unquote sales trainers, would advise that you build rapport before you do anything else. But rapport is almost a poor substitute for trust. I would do business with someone that I thought was a bit of a form of a bird. I would do business with someone who I thought was a bit of a dick if I trusted them. But I wouldn't necessarily do business with someone who I had rapport with if I didn't trust them. And we've all probably got people in our lives, as I say that, and this comes to light with me, perhaps a few people that I need to spend less time with, I've got rapport with them, I get on well with them, they're a laugh, but I don't trust them, and I wouldn't, put my life in their hands. And then on the flip side, there are people, there's people who I do trust, but perhaps they're a bit boring, and I don't spend as much time with them as perhaps what I should, because that's something that can be built over time, that rapport, versus the trust is more integral to all this. So there's a million questions coming next time you come on the show, Stephen. But before that, tell us where we can find out more about the Speed of Trust, where we can find out more about you, and for everyone who wants to learn more about this. And you mentioned some tools perhaps on the website as well. What is the next step for all of this if they want to learn more about it?
Yeah, well, wonderful. I'd encourage you, if you're interested in this, to you can look at my book. It's called The Speed of Trust. And I really show how trust is an economic driver for a salesperson, how it's the currency of leadership and of sales, and how it's learnable. And I give kind of a methodology of how you can build trust on purpose, intentionally, through your credibility and through your behavior. I go in great depth. Today, I kind of just skim the surface to give you a flavor for it. So The Speed of Trust is the book. You can also go to our website, speedoftrust.com. And this is part of the Speed of Trust practice at Franklin Covey. We're a global firm working all around the world. And we have a whole sales performance practice that also blends in Speed of Trust as part of building trust in that process. And so that's a great resource, speedoftrust.com. And then if you're interested in following me on Twitter, I'd love to have you do so. I'm, as I said, at Stephen M.R. Covey. That's Stephen with a PH, M.R., my middle initials for Merrill Richards, Covey, C-O-V-E-Y. And but I'd love to stay connected. And this is a timely, relevant topic for our times, because we're operating increasingly in a low trust world. And so if you as a salesperson can stand for high trust in a world of declining trust, what an advantage. And there's some tools on the website and other places where you can go deeper, learn more, if this is of interest to you.
Love it. And I think, just to echo what you said there, Stephen, I feel like right now where we are in B2B complex sales, you can, and this is just sad, and it's a sad state of society, and it's a sad state of the sales industry. But by just doing what you said you'd do on time, that is a huge differentiator for numerous reasons. And I'm a millennial, and we can perhaps hit on them in a future episode, and thought processes and responsibilities and all this other stuff that kind of gets pulled in with it. But I genuinely think if you can go to a customer, you have to prove it to them multiple times that you just do what you said you're going to do. They're going to rely on you. Price becomes less important because they don't want to be chasing other people for the lowest price. They just want to deal with one individual or one company that can provide everything that they want, within the specific niche, the vertical. I think that's a real differentiator. So I just wanted to echo that point because I think that's really important.
You're exactly right. It's that simple and yet that profound, because what it does is it creates trust and when you have that, you will do what you say you're going to do. When you have that trust, that's making and keeping commitments. And when you have that trust, you'll get to the point where people will say, look, I may not always like what I hear from them, but I know I can trust it. And so when you tell them your solution it costs more, but it's worth it, they believe you because they trust you. And it's not a manipulative trust. It is a authentic, natural trust that flows out of your character, your competence, your credibility, who you are, what you can do, and how you behave with people. It's natural, it's abundant, and becomes that virtuous cycle. So very exciting stuff, and appreciate what you're doing, Will, in educating sales folks everywhere in this process, because we all got to get better. And I'm just saying, keep all the other things you're doing. Start with trust as a multiplier and accelerator. It will help you on everything else that you're doing. It will be a tremendous energizer for all those other things.
Well, talking about energizing, I want to thank you for the energy you brought in this interview. I want to thank you for your time, Stephen. And I want to thank you for joining us on the Salesman Podcast.
Thanks so much, Will. Great to be with you.